efficiency. All right. Well, the efficiency is measured in different parameters depending on whatever it is you're doing. If you're talking about constructing a program of evaluation for educational system, the efficiency might be measured in terms of pass rates or grades. It might be measured in terms of SAT or GRE scores, standardized testing. It might be measured in terms of fluency or proficiency. If you're talking about business, efficiency is almost always measured in how quickly the product can be produced. So it's time dependent, right? How quickly the product can be produced, how much the product costs to manufacture, and how much it is sold in retail. So the first thing to recognize is that anytime we're talking about efficiency, you cannot have a discussion as far as program evaluation is concerned, an analysis, theoretical analysis of program evaluation. In discussing efficiency, you have to discuss time, right? Efficiency is always time dependent. And that's like a categorical, right? ALWA. It's always time. How efficient is this system, right? Macro. How efficient is the system macro is a time-sensitive, time-dependent question. How efficient is this process within the system? You should see now that a process is subordinate to the system itself, right? How efficient is the process within the system is also time-dependent. So I might go, for example, in an analysis of efficiency after I've figured out what the particular workflow might be, and I'm trying to determine what different function, and I'll write function here, because that'll stay function. Once I identify what the function might be, well, the next thing to do is to figure out whether or not this function is efficient, right? So I need to know, is this thing efficient? Is it doing what it ought to do, right? And here's where if you catch this point, then you got the whole thing. So this is probably the most important point to get out of this whole discussion. I have an assumption, a feeling, that the error might be here. I have an assumption, a feeling, that the error might be here. Now I need to test that assumption. I need to test that theory. It's almost like the scientific model, right? You have a hypothesis, you test, you have to make sure you verify, it should be reproducible, and so on and so on, right? It's almost exactly the same, right? My gut feeling is telling me that the problem is with the marketers and the hardware designers, right? I black that section out. Then what I do is I make an assessment of the workflow, and I recognize what the function of these subordinate groups are. Once I recognize what the function is, then I have to determine whether or not those groups, those people representing that function, are efficient in what they do. Right? Are they efficient? Right? In asking the question, are they efficient, I have to recognize that that question is inherently a time-dependent question. Right? How efficient are they in what they do? And in measuring that, the question then becomes, how do I measure efficiency? Right? That in itself is a whole nother lecture. Right? That's like another 8-part lecture on how efficiency is measured. I'm going to give just one example on the measurement of efficiency, which I think is probably the most appropriate for an introduction to program evaluation example. And also, I actually believe it's the most powerful tool of assessment. Okay. If I think that the function of something is Y, we said, right? So whatever that thing is, right? I think the function of the marketers, Y represents to increase or entice. Let's say there's a showroom. And the function of the marketers is to entice people to come into the store itself. Let's just say, for example, right? So that in the newspaper that goes out every weekend, they have a new model of a car with new features and so on. And the marketers, they're supposed to design it, and it's supposed to be appealing, it's supposed to be eye-catching, and they want people to come into the store. Well, how can I test that, right? How can I test to see if the marketers are efficient in what they do? Well, the first thing that you want, and this is just an example, right? This is almost intuitive. You have to have a knack for this type of stuff. But one thing that you can do to test, and this is an example, to test whether or not the marketers are efficient in what they're doing, is if the company isn't already doing it, implement something like what do they call those? The promotional code, right? So you say, you know, in the flyer that you're going to print in your local magazine this Friday, I noticed in the past you guys haven't had promotional codes. Why don't you put a promotional code, you know, whatever, and you come up with some system for promotional codes, PR 98564, and when they come into the store with that, you know, that promotional code PR 9864, whatever that they got from a flyer, you know that the marketers have been successful. Why? Because you were able to track the number of flyers or distributors that were out in the market, and how many, the percentage of those that returned to the showroom floor, and that percentage of how many returned versus how many were sent will give you sort of the efficiency index. It's called the index, the efficiency index of the marketers. That sounded really technical, and I apologize if that didn't make any sense, but that's as simple as, unfortunately, it gets, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to, and we're going to get into assessment in a little bit, you're trying to make an assessment on the effectiveness of a particular group. In order to do that that efficiency test, you need to know what it is that they do, right? And here's actually a simpler way of saying it. Once you know what it is that they ought to do, you check, are they actually, A-C-T-U-A, are they actually doing Y? Are they actually doing Y? And create a test. Create a way to test for Y. So, what's the function? Their function is, the function of the marketers is to do Y. Once you recognize what it is that they're supposed to be doing, you actually ask, are they doing Y? And you create a test to test for Y. And then you could go back to administrators and say, you know, actually they are doing Y. Here's why they're doing Y. I've run a test and they are effectively doing Y. Or you say, no, they're not doing a Y. And I know that they're not doing Y. I ran a test and I found out that they're failing. You bubble that in now for sure. This is no longer hypothetical. They are actually part of the systemic failure, to be technical. Part of the systemic failure of this system is a deficiency within a particular process, right? One branch of the system is failing, and specifically this branch within this example is the marketers, right? They're failing. And now we can understand why they're failing, how they're failing, and we can test for their failure or their passing. Now if they actually pass the test, obviously then I would have to scratch that out as being black, make it white, and check somewhere else, right? And you do this process until you find out where all the failures are, right? Because you want to make a holistic change. You don't want to have to go back and do pinpoint changes, right? Okay, so efficiency is always time dependent. In the example that I gave, you know, they send the mailer out every Friday, every Saturday. You wait and see how much time it takes for the customers to come into the store, the number of customers that came into the store, you verify that with like some promotional code or whatever, and then you can construct sort of your data set, your proof to show that they are efficient or they're not efficient. Okay.